Hey everyone, it's Derek here with another video, and today we're talking about the GoPro Hero 8 Black. So I've had the GoPro Hero 8 Black for 3 years now, and I've been using it for a lot of things, not just action, sports kind of things, but also just walking around. It's pretty small and inconspicuous, and it's really easy to mount, and it's pretty durable. So it obviously has the front lens here, and then it has a front screen, and then it has that rear-facing screen to allow you to see what you're recording. So right now we're recording on that, and all of the clips here will be footage from the actual clip, or from the actual GoPro Hero 8.
Ooh-wee. Video's not going to capture it, but this is gorgeous. Not just talking about her. Her too.
Oh my god. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. RX-8 sounds great.
So GoPro now has a Hero 10, 11, a Bones, and a smaller one which they tried to mimic similar to the GoPro Hero Session. So what's so special about this one? Well, nothing in particular. I think this was the first one. Well, actually the 7 had pretty good audio, but the 8 really refined the audio, and you can actually record everything directly from the GoPro and not really have too big of an issue. I've done some videos of additional features like low light, adding a dead cat to the actual microphones, and hearing the differences. So obviously the microphones aren't bulletproof. If you're riding around in the wind or actions in the wind, it's a little bit tougher to get the audio quality that you want. So with the additions of those, you can also do that. Also, GoPro has a media mod, which then allows you to use third-party audio devices, which is really ridiculous that they make you purchase that. They don't allow you to just use a USB-C cable to a 3.5mm adapter to actually capture audio, which is mind-boggling, but they're trying to make an ecosystem similar to Apple just to make you buy little things here and there. And I think for them it's really been successful. Now, in 2022, there's actually a lot of competition for this GoPro. Now, the Hero 11 had a few updates in getting a bigger sensor. In terms of low light, honestly, you really shouldn't be worried about the sensor. All of these cameras in today's age, when you're talking about the DJI, the GoPro, and the Insta360, those are all cameras that have really good daytime footage. Like daytime, the footage is really good. Now when you go into low light, that's when you run into an issue, and that's when an APS-C sensor, a 1-inch sensor, and a full frame sensor will really help you. So it's not gonna do you any benefits there. I would say the only tricks to that are setting the minimum ISO or the maximum ISO and set that lower so there's not so much grain. One thing that's really good about this particular camera is the stabilization. The stabilization has been improved through the 9, 10, and 11, but again, overall, it's roughly the same. I'd say it's really good. And when you look at the stabilization footage, I really can't complain, especially when you're walking around, if you're vlogging, different things like that. And it works well if you're just walking around vlogging because it's such a small form factor. Now, the other question is, does it beat something like a cell phone camera? And honestly, I think the footage out of a cell phone camera is just quite a bit better. So this is the iPhone 13 mini, and I'd say because it has single lens or dual lenses here, it can go pretty wide, and it can go also pretty and it can shoot 4K too. So I'd say this camera is just a little bit better. And I think it's more so maybe the software processing that makes it a little bit better. I think overall it allows you to get more shallow depth of field. When you're looking at this GoPro, it's mostly all like infinite focus kind of deal. So I'd say it's probably around like an aperture of like f16 kind of deal. So it's just blown out wide open, so you can't see any bokeh between myself and the background here, even though there's a lot of separation. So it's much different than you would see in like an iPhone camera, or if you would see in all the rest of the different cameras that I mentioned with like full frame, APS-C, and 1-inch sensor. So what is so special about this form factor? Like I said, it is very durable, and it's relatively cheap. I mean, honestly, you can get, let's say, a Google Pixel 6a for the same price, and I would say that's probably still more worth it because you can, that's a cell phone. You can do a lot more things with it. So that's something to keep in mind. So overall, I say this camera is just really good. And honestly, the one thing that I would say that would be beneficial to you is possibly having that front-facing screen, because right now I'm just guessing what field of view I have and making sure that I'm in the frame. So that's one thing that I would say. The other thing is that if you do have that, it sometimes ends up being a distraction. So sometimes I think it ends up being like just nice to just wing it and then shoot it in super view and just trying to capture as much as possible. Now, I've had some videos and I've used the Insta360 X3, which is a 360 camera. And there's been, in my head, controversy whether you should get one of those and just forget about GoPros in general. And honestly, it's a tough go. I think the software and the process of like importing and making sure that you are shooting the right thing and having to do the post-processing is kind of tough, and it's pretty lengthy. I think if you're not familiar with and you haven't had too much experience with the Insta360 software, it ends up being kind of a hodgepodge mess if you're trying to use keyframes to go here to here to here. But overall, I'd say the quality of the single lens here is just a little bit better than the Insta360 X3. And honestly, I think really think about, because if you think about like the prices, if you're going to buy an Insta360, it's kind of like two cameras, so you got the front and the back. I would say you should probably sway more towards the Insta360 X3 or a 360 camera, just because you can capture more things with it and it's just more versatile. And honestly, it just gives you other ways to be creative. So is the action camera dead? I think that's a really interesting question to ask, and quite honestly, I think I'm leaning towards the answer of yes. And with that said, instead of just buying one of these, can you use, for example, a cell phone instead of that? And I would say the answer is yes. The quality of the rear-facing cameras on the cell phones are just as good, if not better, than the GoPros. And I'd say probably the one thing that's worse is the front-facing camera of these types of these cell phones. And that's probably one thing where the GoPro would probably win. And possibly also on the audio front too, where the audio from the GoPro, I think in terms of action-wise, is probably a little bit better. One thing that's a big miss on the GoPro Hero 8 is that I've had some overheating issues. When I get over 10-15 minutes of continuous recording in 4K, and even 4K and 30 frames per second, it starts to overheat. And if you don't have the sound on and it just randomly goes off, then you might miss a shot. So that's something to keep note of, is that GoPro has been notoriously known for overheating issues. I think the DJI Action 2 had some issues with overheating, but I think they've gone ahead and fixed that issue completely with their newest version of the Action 3. And the GoPro Hero 11 also rarely has any overheating issues as well. I'd say the other thing to note is that the battery still held up pretty well. I'm still getting roughly 45 minutes to an hour on a full battery on the GoPro Hero 8, so that's something to take note of. GoPro has long since created new enduro batteries, which are made well for the cold, so they can actually run in the cold. I have had issues with this camera not being able to run in the cold and also overheating, so that's something to take note of, is that if you're in the heat and you're not moving, there's no active cooling for it, so you'll probably end up overheating. And also if you're in, sledding or skiing or snowboarding or something like that, it'll have an issue with it being too cold. So with that said, I think these types of cameras are a great deal if you're looking for something and you're on a huge budget. I think I sold my last one for like $120 or something like that. So if you're looking for something that's on the budget side, these things are really cheap and nice to pick up. Also, if you're looking for like FPV drone flying, this is probably also a good option too. If you're worried about, crashing it, this can be a low budget item. Yeah, overall, I really don't have too many complaints about this. I'd say there's some design flaws, like this one here, the GoPro Hero 8 doesn't have the twist off lens, so where it doesn't have the issue of fogging up, but it has the issue, if you crack the lens on this thing, you can't really replace it. So I think that's one of the things where GoPro was trying to do like a, you can't repair this, so that you have to buy a new one sort of thing, or they can buy the accidental care, so if you break it, then you have to buy that package so that you can actually replace it, different things like that. So some things that were really not so great for the consumer, but they have long since fixed that on the 9, 10, and 11. So yeah, I'd say if you're looking for an overall package upgrade, the 8 to the 11 is definitely a good value. And I've heard some issues with the 10, with the screen not being the greatest and having some laggy screen. But yeah, with that said, I'd say if you wanted to buy something today and you were looking for it to be an action camera, you should really go for a 360 camera, something like the Insta360 X3 or even the X2 if you're on more of a budget. But yeah, and if you're not using, or if you're thinking in between it, really just use your cell phone. I understand that it has the same possible issue where it doesn't, like if you're shooting with the rear facing cameras, you can't see what you're recording. I understand that can be an issue, especially if you want to get that sweet footage of the rear facing cameras versus the front facing cameras. But, in a pinch, this is probably the most inconspicuous because people are always using this and the overall quality is pretty good. And not just that, but you really don't have to pay for an extra adapter or anything like that for, well, I guess nowadays you do. So you have to have a lightning port to 3.5 millimeter, and then you have to have a TRRS cable to actually come into here. If you want, there's also DJI mics where you can plug that in directly and then use that wirelessly. And then you can also use like a lavalier mic to connect to this as well. You can also use like something like the Rode Video Micro and hook that up, but you need the TRRS cable to fit into the lightning port adapter here. The overall audio for this is pretty decent. So the one thing that I would say, if you're worried about breaking this, but just keep in mind that, a GoPro in general is like $350 to $450. So if you're looking at something like the Google Pixel 6a, you can also use that, and you can use that just to record video and use that to essentially replace your GoPro, and if it breaks, then you just buy a new one. So the GoPro also has a lot of different features in terms of settings, a lot of settings. So I would say, buy one, play around with the settings. The ones that I typically use are super view and then linear. If I want something that's more, I don't want to say cinematic, but like less warpy and more just like less distortion. And there's a lot of different settings with the stabilization as well. You can also just use it all unstable and then import it and then stable it afterwards. But I think, using the electronic stabilization of the actual camera works really, really well. Just make sure that if you have it, for example, in a car, or if you're doing twists and turns, that you have it on a particular setting that doesn't sway it to the left or right, because the stabilization ends up changing that, and it might make you not see what you're wanting to see. I've seen this a lot on like my car videos where I'm driving and then I make a right turn, but the stabilization goes with the actual turn instead of staying on me. So just keep that in mind when you're going through this. If you do have the stabilization on, it can do that to you. But yeah, if you do have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like watching the content, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And with that said, we will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.